This episode contains graphic descriptions of violence, sexual assault, and disturbing criminal conduct. Some listeners may find the content distressing. The events discussed involve real victims and their families. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
My dear sir, I think that it is just the time to tell you that you are just wasting your time. You will never be able to catch me, as every time I have done what I always intended to do, and remember, it will not stop at this. But I will be fair to you and give you a chance. Let the moon shine very bright in September, because this time it must be perfect. Not one, but two. I am not a maniac by a long shot, but I like to play with you people. You will hear from me before September, and I will give you all the clues, just to see if you can catch me.
This letter had been written in a frantic, almost fevered handwriting, placed inside an unmarked envelope, and sent to the Jersey Police Headquarters in 1966 after the brutal assault of a 9-year-old boy. Like Paisnel Chevalier's prophecies centuries before, it carried both a taunt and a promise. For 11 years, the Beast of Jersey had terrorized the island under cover of darkness, entering homes through windows, whispering threats that turned parents' blood cold. He was playing with his pursuers, drawing them into his twisted game. But like the accused witches of old, his arrogance would prove to be his undoing. Welcome to The Beast of Jersey, a TacoCast Studios production. I'm your host, Johnny Lama, and tonight we continue our journey into one of the darkest chapters of Jersey's history. Episode 3, The Unmasking. Just before midnight, on July 10th, 1971, a stolen Morris 1100 tore through Jersey's narrow streets, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside was a man who had terrorized the island for 11 years, a man who played Father Christmas for local children by day and stalked them by night. In moments, the Beast of Jersey would finally be unmasked, but what police discovered that night would connect to something far darker, a legacy of evil that stretched back through centuries of the island's history and perhaps carries on even today. The suspect offered no resistance, even as police discovered the crude mask and surgical tape hidden in the coat's lining, a face that had terrorized the island for over a decade. The captured beast maintained an unnervingly pleasant demeanor. "I was going to an orgy," he said simply, his voice as casual as if discussing the weather. "I was not involving anybody." Quietly cuffed and escorted to the police station, the Beast of Jersey had finally been caught. July 11th, 1971, 2:55 a.m., Maison du Soleil, Grouville, Jersey Island. It was the pounding at the door that had awoken Joan Paisnel in the early hours of that July morning. Outside stood Detective John William Marsh of the Criminal Investigations Department, along with several other officers. Their faces were grim. One looked like he might be sick, pursing his lips as if to keep down the contents of his stomach. "Mrs. Paisnel," Detective Marsh began, choosing his words carefully, "I don't think you know your husband very well at all." Joan Paisnel sat across from him, struggling to comprehend what police had discovered. For 13 years, she had been married to Edward Paisnel, respected builder, devoted stepfather, the man who played Father Christmas at Eau de la Garenne, a former children's home and industrial school. Their wedding photo hanging on the wall from 1959 shows an ordinary man with gentle eyes and an easy smile. Some might consider him attractive, or perhaps common, certainly unassuming. During the German occupation, Edward had earned a reputation as a sort of Robin Hood, arrested for stealing a freshly slaughtered pig from German officers, distributing the meat among Jersey's hungry families. The island remembered him as a quiet hero. But behind that unassuming, even noble facade, that ordinary face that could have belonged to any neighbor, any friend, lurked something evil. The man who had once fed starving children would later hunt them through Jersey's dark lanes. The gentle smile in that wedding photo would be replaced by a mask that terrorized the island for over a decade. Edward Paisnel hadn't just fooled his wife, he had fooled them all. "The clues were there," she wrote in anguish. "How could I have been so blind?" Joan and Edward were not exactly in a happy marriage. Edward's trade as a builder helped create a magnificent home in the shape of an L, Maison du Soleil, where Joan slept in one section and Edward in the other, often in the company of his mistress, Florence Hawkins. It was happy enough, Joan thought, before that harsh pounding at her door. Now, in the blinding glare of police flashlights, the smiles from the photo seemed to mock her. The police took over the Paisnels' residence that day, cordoning off the home from curious onlookers. They would search every drawer, every surface, every inch. It was what Detective Marsh found hidden in the home that truly revealed the depths of Ted Paisnel's depravity. Behind a concealed door lay a secret room that he had constructed himself, leveraging his skills as a builder, the same skills he had once used to help rebuild Jersey after the war. Inside the hidden room, everything, the walls, the garden implements, even mundane objects, was painted an obsessive shade of ritualistic blue, a color that holds significance in witchcraft and mysticism. There was a mysterious altar in the center, where police found books on the occult, heavy chains arranged in curious patterns, and a curved wooden dagger mounted prominently over a glass chalice. Like the ancient families of Jersey who had practiced their dark arts in hidden places for centuries, Ted Paisnel had created his own temple of evil. The specific patterns of his attacks were not simple torture. They were ritualized and suggested knowledge passed down through generations. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if darkness had seeped into the very walls. Books on witchcraft seemed to whisper from their worn pages, their spines cracked from repeated use. Detective Marsh, who had investigated murders for 20 years, felt something horrible pulse through that room. His heart raced against his ribs as he struggled to maintain composure. The blue walls appeared to throb with an unnatural energy, closing in around him like a suffocating shroud. "Get me out of here," he managed to whisper to his partner, stumbling backward, his hand clutching the door frame. Later, he would write in his report that in his entire career, he had never felt such a presence of pure evil. This wasn't just the lair of a predator. This was a temple to Satan itself. Other officers poured through the room's contents, finding within the depths of the altar room bracelets made of spikes that explained the mysterious parallel scratches found on his victims' bodies. Marks that had mystified investigating officers for years. They also found dozens and dozens of pictures of the Beast of Jersey's crimes that revealed the true extent of his methodical nature. 150 homes, each one carefully documented. Some photos were taken weeks before the attacks, indicating a level of planning that chilled even veteran investigators, learning how he stalked his victims like prey. The English police, who were called in to assist but still had limited experience in such matters, had been baffled by the ritualistic nature of the attacks. They did, however, note a pattern. Each house was isolated with carefully plotted escape routes. This wasn't random violence, this was calculated terror. Each attack had been preceded by careful reconnaissance, each victim selected with disturbing precision. In his desk, they found diaries. Each day was documented, except for curious blank spaces. Days when attacks had occurred. These weren't oversights. They were alibis written in silence, a monster's attention to detail betraying his calculated nature. The evidence against Edward Paisnel was so overwhelming, it was hard to believe he managed to terrorize the island for over a decade without an ounce of suspicion. He fooled his neighbors, his clients, even his own wife. In November 1971, Edward Paisnel stood trial for his crimes. The evidence presented revealed more than just a series of attacks. It exposed a dark obsession that had festered beneath a facade of normalcy for over a decade. In the courtroom sat his mother, who still believed him to be the most wonderful son. His wife, Joan, quiet with pursed lips, haunted by the clues she had missed. And Florence Hawkins, his loyal mistress, burst into hysterical tears, crying out, "Let me be near him." The Royal Court of St. Helier fell silent as the victims stepped forward. A woman, now 26 and married, described that night in March 1960 when she was just 15. "He put a rope around my neck and I passed out for a few moments," she testified, her voice trembling. "The man was hanging onto the rope, pulling it tighter." She was dragged outside and pulled across fields. The man was nervous, she recalled, and kept talking, saying, "Be Jesus or Jesus," words that his co-worker Donald Ball would later confirm hearing Paisnel say regularly. Then came the chilling moment. The man stopped in a field and said, "I am going to rape you." He blindfolded me, threw me to the ground, and raped me. She later drew a sketch of him. "Be Jesus or Jesus," he muttered repeatedly, words that investigators learned would hypnotize his victims into submission. Paisnel was well versed in arts of mysticism, leveraging techniques such as hypnosis to lure children out of their homes. No screams, even at the sight of the beast's ghastly mask, an outfit of chains and spikes, woke their sleeping parents. "But Jesus or Jesus," the beast whispered over and over, then extended his hands out, holding the hands of the children who followed him into the night. Another victim, just 9 at the time, described being taken from her bedroom by a man who said he had a gun. She was forced to put on boots and was wrapped in a rug. In the darkness of a muddy track, he laid her on the ground with a pair of scissors being dug into her neck, blindfolded her with a handkerchief, and raped her. The man who stood before them seemed unchanged, still unnervingly calm, still very straightforward, as Joan had described him in the courtroom. The same man who had treated her like a princess, who had never seemed interested in sex, who had played Father Christmas for local children. The Beast of Jersey was found guilty of 13 charges of assault, rape, and sodomy. The judge sentenced Edward Paisnel to 30 years in prison. As Detective Marsh left the courtroom, Paisnel's voice rang out, a curse that echoed through the halls with the same dark power that had permeated his blue room. "You'll have a fatal heart attack by Christmas," he called after the detective. Like Paisnel Chevalier's final curse centuries before, these words seemed to transcend a mere threat, one last attempt to call unto the mystic realm. This desperate prophecy, however, did not come true. Ted Paisnel hadn't just been a predator. He had been a practitioner of ancient evils, following patterns that echoed back through Jersey's darkest history. "Our cocoon is getting larger. Your world is shrinking." These were Paisnel's cryptic words upon his capture. At first, Investigators dismissed them as the ravings of a madman. But as the years passed, darker truths would emerge about Jersey's hidden world. The Beast of Jersey hadn't been working alone. He was part of a web that stretched across the island, its threads reaching into the highest levels of society. The children's home, where Paisnel had played Father Christmas, Eau de la Garenne, would decades later become the center of another investigation. More victims would come forward. More stories of ritual abuse would surface. The ancient families of Jersey, those who had practiced the dark arts for generations, hadn't stopped with Paisnel's capture. They had simply retreated deeper into the shadows, waiting.